but then some student borrowed it and
Well, I
never
can't
returned
remember.
it. Oh, you good?
But there are a bunch of multi-age assistant books over here, I think.
Yeah, there's a little book on a turtle termites and
Oh, that's a good book. Yeah, I have that one. I own it though, but yeah.
or
Okay, so we're very glad to have this week have Ken Kahn from Oxford, and I met Ken when I was on sabbatical there, and Ken runs it's every term you run a special interest group
Right.
on agents and their applications, and in fact we had an undergraduate with us this summer named Kieran who told me that he
Yeah.
actually made that presentation.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
Anyway, so Ken's going to tell us today about ABMs to everybody.
Right. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. So first off, I'll give this URL again at the end, but since I have links to all sorts of demos and resources, the online version has advantages. So the first thing I wanted to discuss is sort of why would you want to make agent-based modeling accessible? And Felix Reed Shosas was one of the first to contact me way back over 10 years ago to run a 3-hour practical for his MBA students. And many people thought this was odd because MBA students build agent-based models. But he told them, you know, this is pretty much what he said, which was that you're never going to be building one, but you can make decisions depending upon them, and it's worth getting some firsthand experience of what it's like. And we did this for several years, but because we were getting funded, and we had to ask them to fill out a questionnaire afterwards about what they thought of it, and it was really quite positive. They all thought it was time well spent, and they enjoyed it, and so on. So that's sort of the literacy in the same sense of just having some familiarity with this technology or something. And then the obvious people should be the policymakers, decision makers. Though I have to tell this story, which is that I got invited to the House of Lords. They were having a meeting about modeling and policy or something. And at one of the breaks, I went up to one of the, I forget what you call them, but basically the top aides that really do all the real work, not the lords and so on. And I asked him, about modeling and decision making, and he said, so often it's they've already decided and they just want a model to confirm what they want to do anyways, and that's really much of what's going on.
oh, they do that too.
Yeah, right. And of course, so many different kind of scientists, including ones, that are people don't necessarily think of, like archaeologists, or I collaborated a lot with people in anthropology that were studying religion and so on. So there's, and then Mitch Resnick wrote this really nice essay 25 years ago or whatever, called Beyond the Centralized Mindset, where it started off just, if you ask them on the street or a kid, about ants or bees or whatever, they all think, the queen's in charge and telling them what to do or something. But he had many examples of where people just have this preconception that there has to be a central control and authority. And he was promoting NetLogo as a way to kind of break this centralized mindset where you could see how distributed systems might be able to do something intelligent. And then at the Santa Fe Institute, there's been this project. Standing.
The G is not girls kind of.
No, because this. Oh, maybe they.
Did it when it was girls.
Well, here we could. Who we are? Growing up thinking scientifically. That's what it stands for. Yeah. Okay. So you might think that NetLogo is enough because it has all these very good properties for making it more accessible. So the language itself grew out of NetLogo, that grew out of Logo, and Logo was designed for small children and primary school students. I don't know if everybody knows what the star means in NetLogo. No? Okay. So there was this computer, the connection machine, 65,000 SIMD processors, and people started making star Lisp, star Fortran, star somebody. You had you could have up to 6,000 agents that were really running in parallel in the hardware. And just like the way NetLogo works, where you would say, ask those with or something, or ask turtles, and then you'd ask them if something, then you'd be talking to only the subsets that you cared about. Going to make the models available on the net through Java applets. And Java applets were very successful for about 10 years and then suffered all these security problems and disappeared. And then the NetLogo team, after a couple of years, came out with NetLogo Web, which is a pure JavaScript implementation that runs in the browser, and it's I don't know, over 90% of the language, but there's always a few little things it can't quite do or something, but almost all the demos work. But the other thing that's really, I think, wonderful about NetLogo is the models library. There's like 200 or 300 models that were really carefully designed. The code is as clear and simple as possible. And each one has a very nice structure of, you know, what this is, how it works, what kind of things you could do, what kinds of changes you might want to make. Or it's nicely structured, and they're very easy to play with. So that's.
You've seen also that you did not mention it, the agent script.
Yeah.
That's Steve Garrison, which is kind of.
Right. So that was predates by a lot the NetLogo Web, and then there's Weibo. I don't know. Yeah, Weibo kind of built on that. He saw that and kind of made another web version that's yeah. So so that's the question: is this enough if you're trying to make things more accessible? And here's my problem with it, which is that I think you could do much more than that. So one thing that I very much like, and I'll show you a fantastic example of this in a few minutes, is that you could interleave models with lots of rich text with pictures and all that. To what Alan Kay, when he first wrote about this 25 years ago, called active essays, and a lot of people now call them explorable explanations or whatever. So there's that, and then not quite as exciting, but there is all these sort of computational notebooks where whatever commands you have are easy to rerun, but there's also text in front of and below it, and you could sort of see it's very easy to build a little tutorial that way, or capture how you did something. So those don't fit very well with NetLogo right now. And I'll be demonstrating the Epidemic Game Maker, which is a project I did together with the zoology department, because we had a big exhibit at the Royal Society, and more about that in a minute. And then the main work I did up for almost 10 years was this project Modelling4All, which the idea was to make a much higher level browser-based interface for building models, in which you kind of browsed for components and customized them and composed them. As a matter of fact, we called the tool the Behaviour Composer. So those are things I think one could go beyond. And I mentioned, Alan, in the original essay, which of course disappeared long ago, but here's a Wayback Machine link or something. He describes active essays as a new kind of literacy, combining a written essay, live simulations, and the programs that make them work, or something. Does everybody know who Alan Kay is or something too? Or, well, all right. So just in case, Alan Kay's was at Xerox PARC. He was the one that led the team that made Smalltalk, the first sort of object-oriented programming language. The same team also made the first, really graphical user interface, with menus and icons and all that kind of stuff. And he's won all sorts of awards and so on. All right. So the active essays was this great idea, and there was a really nice one where you get to read about evolution, but play with little simulations, and read a bit more and play with some more advanced things. There was a whole series of them about emergence that But the problem with almost all of these was that they used the technology of the day, which might have been browser plugins or Java applets and so on. So some of them have been re-implemented. So like this link will take you to, well, actually take you to one that was re-implemented in Flash, which at least still sort of survives. And this going in circles, I remember that was one of the ones that I first saw that impressed me, because you think you know what a circle is, but they have like 5 or 6 different ways of thinking about circles computationally that are all very different, including one that's very agent based, where you create hundreds of turtles all at one spot with random headings, and then they just go forward the radius, and you get a circle of of agents. So HTML5, means that you could have some really sophisticated programs running in the browser. So there's been a real resurgence in the last few years. And the parable of the polygons is what I'll be showing you quite soon. And you'll see why if you don't know what the polygons are. But there's a lot of other ones that really take this idea, really long one, all about abstraction, and then whatever the opposite is, back and forth, up and down the levels. And there's people now, everybody wants to give this a different name, so I still call them active essays, but uh-oh, what did I do? Oh, that's his demo, but we're not going to do that now. I pushed the wrong button there. Okay, so it's...
Practical matter, back to the, I guess this next slide is different. In the same way that there were security risks with all the applets and things,
right.
Is there in fact no security issues with HTML5?
Yeah, there's none other than they might steal some cycles, but that's not. You go to a web page and it does 20 minutes of Bitcoin mining while you're reading something. Yeah, no, it's been real good about that. So just to be careful, I opened some of these links beforehand, but they're just the ones that we're about to see here. Oh, so you're not supposed to see that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So so first, I'll show you the NetLogo. This is the web version of NetLogo, and this is the segregation model. And I could say setup, and it creates a population, and then we could say go once, and all those that didn't like the neighborhood moved, and those that didn't like the neighborhood moved. And if I say go very quickly, you get the segregated neighborhoods, and you get these nice graphs that are happening as it's running, and you could, they're nice and interactive graphs, and you could, there's different ways to visualize it and so on. So, but the other thing, as I mentioned, for all of the NetLogo models, you could commands directly here in the command center. You could look at the code, which is really quite short and well commented. It's about a page of code here, and somewhere in here is the modeling info, where there's always a section: what is it, how to use it, things to notice, things to try, ideas for extensions, what features it kind of highlights, and some references and so on. So it's nice, and you can play with it. But let me show you the parable of the polygons. How many people have ever seen it? I don't know.
I usually present this in my HBS.
You do?
So, at least half.
Okay. But so maybe I'll go a little quicker. So first of it starts you off with the very basic thing that this yellow triangle is not very happy because all the neighbors are blue squares, and if we move him over here, he's happy now because at least he's got a few neighbors, even though in this case, like many of the examples, the majority of his neighbors here are blue squares, but at least he's got some yellow triangle neighbors or something. And so if his rule is that he doesn't want to live somewhere where his kind is less than a third in the neighborhood, then this guy could move here. Oops, still not happy. Whoops. Is there a way to make this guy happy? I don't know. Maybe. Oh, right, because anyway.
So still not happy even though he's right next to it.
Yeah, because his rule is a third, and he's there's only a quarter of his neighbors. And I forget. I'm gonna go quicker because you can play with. So then you could get these. This is like a real puzzle because you're gonna try to make everybody happy. So you're gonna say, okay, this guy'd be happy if he goes over here. Oops, no. He'll be happy here, but now this guy's unhappy, so we can move him here. And you could kind of try and make everybody happy, just to get a. Yeah, there's the smile on their face is what you should be paying attention to, and so then we start to get into the simulation. So here, if we just run the simulation, it's very much like the NetLogo one, but a little bit cuter. And then you can get a new one, and you get the nice graph as it's running of how much segregation there is or something. And but again, it's meant to be an essay. You're supposed to read these things explaining some of the ideas, how small biases could lead to a large collective bias, and so on. Tolerant would make a difference or something. And we're still getting. Yeah. Yeah. So it's. And then they start to get into, right. So here, if you look, everybody's happy because of where they are, but it's really segregated. So you think, okay, let's see if we make it so everybody's really tolerant of everybody else, and say start moving, and it doesn't become integrated because everybody's still happy where they are, even if it's integrated. So then they add their own little twist, which is one, which is there may be people that prefer some diversity. They actually want to have some neighbors that aren't identical to them. So in this one, even though we've got to a segregated neighborhood, if we click here, it'll be kind of a balance between the two of, they don't want to be, nobody wants to be unique in the neighborhood, but nobody wants to be, yeah, right. Yeah. This is my nephew, by the way. He's visiting. So, and you start to play more and more. It just goes on and with, and then wrapping up with the big ideas or something. So here's what I think is the big ideas here. So it's again on the active essay story again of interleaving models and text, but I think also the graphics is both cute and helpful in the sense that it communicates a little bit better than just the little NetLogo squares or whatever shape. And the reason it's called the parable of polygons is because polygons don't easily map to some human ethnic group. So you don't want to run this where everybody's thinking of, some ethnic group versus another ethnic group. If you had, so, and that's also probably why yellow and blue were picked, because there's, there's no blue people. But I think also this whole direct manipulation for parts of it, especially in the beginning, really helps people get a sense of what the rules are and what's the challenge of trying, and why, if they keep running these rules, why it happens. That a simulation, even if you've got a slider for the speed, it's a little harder to completely understand what's happening, but if you're doing it manually, you get a clearer understanding of what's happening.
That's because there's no text around the NetLogo slider.
Well, I mean, we could go back to it. I think there's a little bit of text, but let's see. So it says density. Oh, you could. That's set up, but here it's percentage similar wanted. Maybe that's part of the problem, that that's kind of a unclear variable name. Yeah, there is this restriction that these are typically, at least, the variable name. It's not just like some string or something.
So you can, in
NetLogo, you can add a display name.
That's true. Yeah. It's just that most people don't bother because by default you just get them being the same. But yeah, you're right. You could have a display name. And I think it was nice. And yeah.
Yuri just stuck closely to the shelling.
Right. And Schelling, by the way, came to Oxford about 10 years ago. And this discussion came up about modifying his model. And he said modifications that keep it at the conceptual abstract level are great. It's big space to explore. And then there's segregation models that are all driven by data and that are very realistic. And he said the real problem is people that make things in between that don't make any sense to him, that are kind of partially abstract and partially data driven. Yeah. So that's one way of making things accessible is as like with the parable of the polygons. Another thing is to make the models into games where either all the agents are normal agent-based model agents except for one that's being controlled by the player or the user, and you're kind of in this world interacting with it. And that's particularly useful for things like a swarming model where all the fish or birds move depending upon what their neighbors are doing. But if you're controlling one of them, can you actually make the whole swarm do something different or whatever? But the more common way in which you turn an agent-based model into a game is that you're changing the whole world. You might change, the rate at which a disease spreads, or how much energy you get from eating grass, or something like that.
I remember one, Ken, that within specialized communities at ABM, they have special terminology. So for most of my experience, that in the people who do environmental models, like environmental policy models, they will oftentimes call, number one, you guys can correct me, basically it's called participatory simulation.
Yeah.
Because they'll have a policy.
Yes.
Control.
Right. And it doesn't have to be one agent. I mean, the HubNet from the NetLogo people, everybody could be, every student in the class could be a different person, and some of them might get infected and some not, and you might, spread or whatever. So can be a multiplayer one. Though typically, there's no reason they couldn't have a mixture of computer-controlled and human ones. They often, if it's a large group, they usually don't. But so I was asked to build this epidemic game maker for the Royal Society Summer Exhibition, and the Queen came to our exhibition, but the exhibition had 3 or 4 parts because it was all about emerging viruses and stuff. And that little, what looks like a little dog there is an Ethiopian wolf, and she was much more interested in that, even though right next to her was, build your own epidemic. So she came like 10 feet away, and we didn't get our chance to. Well, no, but there was some interesting science going on with the rabies. Well, why should no? But that's a good thing you bring up, because the real challenge for this project was that you had to deal with the fact that you could get little kids come by for the exhibits. You could get, fellows of the Royal Society come by for exhibits. You get this whole range, and some will want to see, just sample a little everything, so they'll come for a few minutes and wander off a few minutes. And some of the kids we had, spent 30 minutes or something, but typically it's 5 or 10 minutes or something. So you had to kind of design everything that would work like that. And let me show you what we built, because the important idea here, maybe I should zoom in a little bit even. The important idea here was to give them a flavor for not just running and seeing agent-based models, but a little bit of a taste of actually designing them or building them. So if you just click here and to play the game, it started off with the most basic kind of epidemic model. And the first time it's loading a lot of stuff, I should have tried to preload it. And what we've done too is we've hidden a lot of the details, but at the very bottom, the only thing that's going on is there's one kid that's got an infection, the one that was yellow with the red thing on them. And this is their school and this is their homes. And this is a measure of how healthy the society is, or the town or something. So as more and more people get sick, you're losing out on some of the little smiley faces. Wow. And then the graphs are being produced as it's happening. So that's, you know, would be interesting for 1 minute. But the thing that is interesting is if we go back here, you could say, well, what happens if more than one school? How different would that be? And we really encourage the kids to kind of, you know, make 1 or 2 changes at a time. I mean, someone would still push 5 buttons and then see it's completely different. But what's interesting about adding more schools is, there we go. So we see now that there's 4 schools, and there's this kid here was sick. But what's happening is these are really isolated populations, that this epidemic never spreads beyond the kids that are the one kid that went to that school, I think. So it should sort of level off, and they're going to recover and so on. So then another thing you might do to the model is add adults going to work, and now through the adults, you could get the virus moving to the other schools, and everybody gets infected. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yes. So this is this level is the where you can play with the model, and here's where you can make it into a game. So every time you pick one of these, like school closing, you're adding a button that would close the school, and then you might want to maybe run a campaign that would ask people if they're not feeling well to stay home. There was a big thing, this was happening during the, or maybe it was just a year after the 2009 pandemic that wasn't really very deadly, luckily. And there was a big hand washing campaign. Now, if we click on this, what it says is it doesn't make any sense to wash your hands if you're not modeling the idea that you might leave a virus behind, because the model right now is that viruses are only transmitted if you come into contact with another person. They're at the same location. So it doesn't help if your hands are washed, because you're still breathing on each other or whatever.
Right, so it's airborne.
It's airborne. But if we click here, now what we're doing is sorry, I just realized a minute ago I lied to you guys. But when we added 4 schools, I thought it was looking like they were kind of spreading. But that's because I hadn't checked this thing that said that you go to the school that's closest to your house. But anyways, but now that we leave trails behind, we could say, let's do hand washing or something. And just in the interest of time, I'll even this other campaign that you saw, which was that you should, use Kleenex, basically. So now we've got almost a full-featured model and game. I didn't check everything, but
While it's loading, I'll ask an ABM question, Ken.
yeah.
So when you have all those different buttons you can click, you have combinatorially a vast number of models that are possible.
Yeah, which,
How do you, have you ever, you can't actually check probably every variant to know it's working right?
well, no, but it can be built in such a modular fashion, you can be confident.
You're hoping it's going to work right.
Yeah. So as you see here, we have these workplaces, we have the schools, but we also have now these 4 buttons. But we also have this on the side here, these coins. And the idea is that if you're the public health official, sure, you'd like to run all these things, run a bunch of ads, close the schools, but even closing schools costs something. So if we say go here, nothing's happening. But if I now say, oh, close the schools, now the schools are closed and the kids don't go to school. And then I could say, oh, I want to spend some money on a hand washing ad. And it says 5 people are now regularly washing their hands. I click again, we got 10, 14. And then we can have people stay at home now. Uh-oh, what's that saying? Oh, right. I don't know why it popped up this way. But it says no more money left for adverts or something. So we can't, now it's just going to run without us having any control anymore. We ran out of resources to fight this virus or something. And one of the things that we always ask, these are the viruses left behind, disappearing after some time. By the way, there's, I think at the bottom, oh, somehow when I switched to the web version, it says not a number. But it used to say, April 1st, April 2nd, April 3rd, or whatever, so you kind of keep track of the days. What kind of mouse here? Yeah, it is, yes. Susceptible, infected, recover, yeah. Right. So, but it's important that it's an age-based one because the SIR models are often for the whole populations, but here you've got a lot of spatial heterogeneity and behavioral heterogeneity that matters or something. So one more set of features, but I won't even bother, is that you could click here and you could actually change any of these parameters. If you want to see how different it would be with the infection odds or the encounter rates and stuff. And of course, a lot of when they saw this, they tried to make, get everybody as sick as quickly as possible, sort of what would give the maximum values for many of these things. But the other thing that was really important, I think, about this was we always tried to ask the kids, well, what do you think's wrong with this model? And they almost all said, oh, the school closing is silly because we would still go to our friend's house or meet in the mall and it would still transmit. I mean, they understood what was going on, but they also realized that closing the school wouldn't have much effect on the transmission because you'd still be seeing each other. The other thing that was funny was only the girls said, oh, the hand washing campaign, boys will ignore it, they'll never wash their hands, so there's no point in doing that or something. It's not very realistic or something. But the other thing that a few students did was clicked on this advanced mode. And now, if I want to see how does a person actually work? So the number of people is the susceptible population plus the initial infected population, and then there's things affecting, their color and their shape and how they move and so on, and with the, and there was one like 10-year-old who saw this, and then he saw this, and then he figured out a way to make the school move around, and then the students had to chase the school around as the school was moving. So this was, it was well worth it. There was a lot of like 1,000 games got made that week or something. Yeah. So it's all public domain. We had this additional feature, which was you could get a serial number and then show what you made. Enter the serial number and it would remember, your configuration and be able to. You could show your friends or your parents what you made while you're there. All right. So that's the idea of the epidemic game maker.
But it basically requires knowledge of NetLogo to modify the code substantially.
Well, not quite, but I'll show you the Behaviour Composer. So the way this kid did it was, I don't know how he knew this much. If you go under the library and you go under movement, there's movements like wander forward by repeatedly turning small amounts or something. You click on this, and here, and each one of these, if you click further in, is just a little bit of NetLogo code. But they could take this wander behavior and say add it to a prototype and say add it to the school. And now when you play the game, the school should wander around or something. So they didn't really need to know at the low level about NetLogo. They let's see if this worked. This was one of the kids that spent half an hour and kept, playing with things. Yeah, there's the schools wandering around or something. Oh, actually, they went off the screen, but I think they had a different behavior that was preventing them from going too far off screen. Or
It's good that they found a way to get students to pursue education.
yeah, right. Yes, pursue it. Yeah, very good. Yes. Okay. So what you just saw there was this tool that we built called the Behaviour Composer. And some of the ideas were that you have these higher level modules that could have other ones, like the one that was moving forward and turning and so on. And these themselves are just completely web-based. They're just web pages that have this information on them or something. And then the whole system could be both fit in with the whole Web 2.0 kind of ideas of, it could be just a piece of something else. And I'll show you in a minute how the tutorials also took advantage of all this web-based stuff. And you don't need to register or anything. ID, it's a bit like or something, except that you don't even have to register. It's just you end up with a unique URL, and if you want to share it with somebody, you send somebody that URL or something. But we don't know who these people are, or we don't have to keep track of passwords and usernames or anything. And then the way the Epidemic Game Maker was made, in principle, you could create ones for other kinds of models. That it was more of a generic mechanism underlying it. And this is crossed off because the earliest version did have the ability to have people connecting to the same web page remotely, anywhere in the world, and then they could be adding behaviors and sharing it. But it got used so little, and then when the new server, it was too much work to get it working. And okay, so let's see, what was it? Oh, so here's the justification. This actually got us funded 10, 12 years ago. We said that, we showed this picture, which of course is pure, imagination. There's not, which is that the amount of learning you could do if you just watch a simulation plateaus really soon, but it does have the advantage that with very little effort, people are learning something, and they don't have to do any kind of understanding of the underlying thing. And if they're going to run a model, they could go the plateau higher, but there's this period where they have to learn what the controls are and what the buttons are, and kind of understand more before they could understand what they're doing, as opposed to just watching something. And then, like I saw with the NetLogo documentation, they always suggest a period where you're at least not learning very much about the subject domain. You might be learning more modeling or something. But once you've kind of are able to have that skill, then you can go much higher. And if you just build from scratch, you could go way up. But of course, there's an awful long time when a lot of pain. You have to learn, I remember when we first got started, there was a Northwestern doctoral student that was focused on sort of how do you design workshops, how do you train people, and he said, that after 40 hours they could make their own models or something. But that's asking a lot for a lot of context. So, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's of course different levels of expertise there, but at least models that they were thinking of and so. But here's what I added, which is this blue line, which is where you're finding these behaviors together and customizing them, and you don't need to understand as much, and you can go pretty high, though not quite as high as if you're just using the low-level building blocks and you do anything. Yeah, Well, more like, yeah, you're combining wheels and crankshafts and windows, but instead of building them and using them, right? So let me show you.
Basically, you reuse a lot of already created code.
Yeah, that's much of what's happening. Right,
You
right.
don't get the insight you would have gained by building everything from scratch.
Well, yeah, except that the slogan we used in this project was we were encouraging what we called middle out programming, so that this where they were composing higher level things to get up there to build their epidemic or ecosystem. But then it was important that you can go middle down if you're interested, and you could see how it works and even change it or create new lower level ones. So, and there definitely were some.
You add detail, in other words, about things like how people would interact with terrain.
Yeah,
You didn't have that.
right, right, yeah, that's a, yeah. As a matter of fact, that was the tutorials where the wolf and sheep were at the end, you started saying, well, how about if you put in a river and they can't cross the water, but there's some, anyways. So what I'm gonna try to do, which is, since hopefully won't make any big mistakes here, let me just start a new one, a fresh, is show you how you could build Schelling's model using this system. So first off, we may as well, just for sanity, call this household or something. Yes. And maybe I don't know, 400 of them or something. So if I could run this right now where there's just 400 things called household, and it's really pretty boring. If I do a setup, there's all 400 of them right in the center or something. So if I go to the library, I could find something that says move to a patch where there's nothing there. That sounds like what I'd want my guys to do. So I just click on this and add it to the household. And now when I run it, they should get scattered all over. But these don't really look like households. So if I go back to the library, there's a section about appearances, and I'll pick a shape. So here's all the shapes that NetLogo has, and there's one called, well, I'll just pick that one. I know, it's pretty fancy. So I'll add this to our model and run this. Set up, and now we got all these nice houses. But for the segregation, we want only two kinds of entities. So if we go back to the library and under color, it even says in the little documentation here, I think, oh, it's saying how you could pick any color with red, green, and blue. But what I'm going to do instead is assume that I know this much NetLogo, which is above, and I could say red and green or something. So set the color to, and one of will just randomly pick from that list. So now we should be and it looks pretty good, and every time I hit setup, it's a different. So the next thing we want to do is to have the move if they're unhappy. So the first trick is a bit of a funny idea, which is, you know, this move to an empty patch, that's actually what we want them to do, but only under certain conditions. So I could click on this and say add it to the prototype so we get another one. And I'll open this one up. And first off, I'm going to rename it to move if unhappy or something. So what we're going to, there's all these enhancements we can make to this behavior. And one is to make it conditional. So the condition is that, boy, it's been a while since I've done this demo, but is that the number that are different is greater, well, greater than the total times my threshold. The threshold for acceptance. So that's good. But now, what is different in total than my threshold? Well, we could enhance this to introduce a variable, and we could say the total is the count of, and this you need to know a little bit of NetLogo. Turtles on neighbors. I think that's right. Turtles on neighbors. Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know. We'll see if I make a mistake. And another enhancement is to add another variable, which is the ones that are different. And that's what happened? Yeah. And I want to say with, and there's various ways to write this, but I'll write it as no, I think I'll do it the clearer way. I'll say if my color is not equal to the no, this is the color of the neighbors, and that's different from color of this house or something. So what about the color of this house? Well, that's one more variable we have to do. We're almost done, if you're wondering why I'm writing all this code right here. So color of this house is just color. But the tricky part about all this is that in this context, color refers to the color of each neighbor, while here this is the color of the guy that's thinking about moving. So we got this working, and now if I say enhance this to keep doing this over and over again on every tick, we could just try running this, and if I didn't make any mistakes, we'll see what happens. So I do the setup, and then I say go, and everybody's unhappy all the time. And the reason for that is that we said if it's greater than the threshold, but NetLogo has this idea that if you don't declare a variable, it's 0. So so what we need to do is find a up here at the top there's categories. So we go to attributes, and we want to make an attribute that's called my threshold. And I said that you want to move if the number that are different is greater than, I don't know which way I did it. I always get this wrong. Well, I'll say 0.3, but maybe I mean 0.7. And it's a good idea to rename this my threshold.
Did I see somewhere that you can export this into that mode?
Yeah, you're right. So this download button, if I just click here, and then I say save, click here, then I could save it. No, I should put it someplace sensible. Downloads or something. And then we could run it in NetLogo and have all the full features of everything. But it was much more convenient to kind of quickly do the run sort of thing. I guess that's probably right. I don't know. Yeah, well, first I remember it wraps around by default, so that this neighbor is this guy and this neighbor is here. But I probably shouldn't try to debug this in front of you guys. But here's one that here's one where I built when I was teaching a course, and I could do this more leisurely. And the only difference really is that I put in a slider with a minimum and maximum threshold. So if we run this one, it's pretty much the same, but now we could decide what the population size is, and we could say that we want some people to be very tolerant and some people to be less tolerant or something. And now you could see that some of those people took a longer time. And then you could add visualizations where the tolerant people are maybe bigger and the less tolerant one are smaller, so you could see what's happening. Lots of different, things you could start to play with. Like you said, there's so many different variants, but it's so much easier to play with it if you got this higher level modularity.
Economically, now, if the beginning student makes a mistake here, does it gracefully correct it, gracefully degrade as it were?
Sometimes, I mean, yeah. So what's too bad about the web version is that for a majority of bugs, they are much easier in NetLogo. So if you get a bug, you download it and then you could actually inspect things and watch what's happening and so on. So that's unfortunate but true. A couple more things I wanted to show. So
An important point, though, was any kind of computer classes spend preponderance of our time watching something that's really well worked out and right.
right.
And then we get out into the real world and spend preponderance of our time figuring out how to correct what went wrong.
Yeah. No, as a matter of fact, I have, when I'm teaching, done this segregation thing, and then it's not working, and then even it becomes a kind of, anybody in the class figure out what it is, or if they can't, I kind of walk through the kind of debugging steps so that it becomes more of a lesson on the process rather than the result. So what I wanted to show real quickly about the interactive, let me start a fresh one even, tutorials. And this was a very important way in which we got students to start off things. Like, this is the easiest one. This is a little sheep and wolf kind of thing, but there's an epidemic one and a sugarscape one too. And the idea is that, first off, it turns out much easier if I split the screen like this. That, usually it fits better. I don't know what I did. But in the beginning, it's giving you very instructions, like click here, select rename, change this to wolf. And now if you want to pick the shape, you should go here and, make it actually look like a wolf. And, but the instructions become more and more vague after a while, and you eventually, pretty much build the whole thing with the grass and the reproduction and dying and all this. And then at the very end, there's even some links to further guides, to one where you're modeling the age of the prey, and the very young and the very old are easier for the predators to catch, and another one where you get some geographical diversity and so on. So, and also if you just want to do the enhancements, this is what the students get to after. I suppose. Oh, here it is. After an hour and a half. So they've got the wolf has the behavior of how it's moving, it's eating and getting its initial energy, starving, reproducing. The sheep, pretty similar except eating grass, and the grass recovers after a period of time, and then you have observation, behaviors, and so on. So it's all built up into these nice modules here. So I think there's one more demo that I wanted to show here. Yeah. No. So the more adventuresome students very quickly kind of go off tutorial, and they're making it quite different, or they're adding new features and so on. But the guide pretty much leads to sort of a simple version. So that was the idea of the tutorials, and then the biggest example of something I did with was modeling the pandemic of 1918, otherwise known as the Spanish flu. And what's interesting about a simulation like this is that you could, first off, there's two major theories about where it started. One was in an army camp in northern France, another one was an army camp in Kansas. So you could play with that, with the model. And then the model has a few kind of built in, like what would have happened if there had you had the same virus, but you didn't have War I, so there wasn't as much crowding in army camps and the same kind of traveling around. Also, the war ended just when the most deadly wave was peaking. And if you see these pictures of the armistice celebrations where 1 million people go to the town square, everybody's kissing and hugging, the viruses must have been very happy with that. But you could, how much did that really matter? So let me, it's a big model. Where is it? Yeah, this is it. So there's models of the population of the world, observers, army camps. I think there's some more things. Well, anyways, but the problem is that there was 1.8 billion people, and this was meant to be an educational tool. So instead, within each patch, you're modeling the population in an aggregate way, but you're still having ships and troops. Some agents are moving around, and you also have some movement from one region to another. So it's kind of this hybrid model, and because it's using a couple of features that don't really work very well in the web version. Here's the version in NetLogo or something. So it's running it right now with the setting that it started in Camp Funston here in Kansas. And the date is May 1918. So there's a lot of US troops going off to Europe. But there's also ships that are just ordinary commerce ships traveling around or something. And it looks as if the things are getting better already, that the fewer and fewer people are getting infected, and there's not much of an infection. And now suddenly the second wave starts in October. And this is the one where if you look at the deaths, they're just climbing like crazy or something. And they think that between 50 and 100 million people died, which with 1.8 billion, that could be as much as 1 out of 20 people dying.
It's also more than died in 40 World War I.
Yeah. Many more dying here than the war.
Now, this is just a history for sure right now, right? There's no model.
No, this is the model running.
Oh.
So if I like hover over here, you'll see it says at this little only 0.5% or, and 99.5% have recovered there, and 5% have died. But I could, even while it's running, I could do this, and the numbers will be changing and stuff.
In Russia.
Amount of data that was sort of available in terms of how people were traveling, and in some cases, I even copied. It was somewhere in Russia where the White Russians were fighting the Red Russians or something, and Angel something, I don't know, forget the name of the place. Anyways, that might have been. Yeah, that's it. That's the name of the place. Yeah. So I did that mostly to sort of give you a sense of somebody playing with it, how you could be modeling great detail, but mostly it was coarser than that. So here's the two things you could experiment with. So I'm running right now historical. Say, let's run this over again where there's no war at all, no army camps, no troop movements. Or you could have the war ending much later. And it changes the dynamics, but the total number of infections and deaths doesn't change very much.
What happens if the war ends 6 months earlier, countries are willing to share incidence data?
I didn't do it, but one of the things that's important here is that things are pretty modular. One thing I usually did with students was I said, well, this is the model of the American, and this is when I actually got a lot of the data. So this is saying that well, here's the numbers. So this is 20,000 troops starting in June 1917, then 18, then 25, then and but it was up to 250 or 245, 280,000 troops, American troops going to Europe. These are each different months. So and then there was different places they would start or end up. So 77% of the troops started in New York and 15% from Newport News, and then they would end up going to Liverpool or London or whatever. Yeah. So this is the model of the troops, and there's some other model about how long it takes them because, but clearly you could get the infection to travel from America to Europe this way. The point I want to make here is that if I click on this and I say inactivate, and then it turns out I didn't really write it as nicely as I should have, so that you need a dummy one that doesn't really do anything. So if you look at this dummy version, it basically still defines this function, but nothing actually happens. It just reports the empty list or something. But now you can run the whole model saying everything's held the same except the Americans join the war, what's going to happen? So your example would be possible to sort of play with as well or something.
The numbers fall.
Yeah. Well, but what I learned when I played with a lot of examples was a lot of these interventions or differences would definitely reduce the peaks, but eventually everybody kind of gets it anyways. Yeah.
So it would still, people weren't, I guess the shipments would have to keep going.
Yeah, there's still the shipments and so. The other thing I did when I was doing this is I read every book and I could and all these different things, and there were interesting examples. Like Australia put up a real strong quarantine, and it delayed the infection by over 6 months, and the third wave was much early, so they all got it, but there weren't as many deaths. Yeah. And here's, there was all these really sad stories of, where this little village in Alaska where they get some supplies and then a week later everybody is sick, and then the worst thing about it from the point of view of villages like that in the winter was that it was the young, healthy people that were the sickest. So that left the children and the old people unable to go out and gather wood or to hunt or something, and then they were starting to starve, and it just gets really bad.
But in the spirit of not taking our models too seriously, let me just mention
Yeah.
that there are some people in the room here who have a lot of expertise on the limitations of NetLogo, for example. Things like, we know that how you activate the agents, whether you activate like the sick people first and it's susceptible to
Yeah. So yeah.
my final thought is, it's possible actually to do sufficient randomization of activation.
Yeah, like a push button way to do that.
Yeah.
That would be
So I have, when I designed this, I was very concerned with this question about synchronous versus asynchronous updates. So I put in this convention that, first off, there's all these naming conventions. If you say my hyphen, then it assumes this is
A variable of that agent. But if you say my next, age, or my next, health, or whatever it is, status, that'll be for the next period. So you could have easily get everybody where you could be reading the current state and updating the next state, and they don't interfere, and then everything moves synchronously. So I did put in effort for that, and then it almost never got used, but I put it in there because I thought that was an important feature. So there are these that you can make easier that are clumsy in NetLogo, right? By having this kind of, because all this is doing is generating a lot of NetLogo code. If you actually, maybe I should show you, and I'll get to that in a second. Like this is this huge model, and if we actually look at the code tab, I tried to have it kind of indent and use reasonable names and stuff, but it is kind of somewhat generated and somewhat clips. Yeah.
You have numbers on how the numbers of people embarking are distributed by ports and people arriving
Right.
by ports. But do you have also numbers of
Well, that runs dynamically. If you start off the index case like in Kansas, then at the time when the ship leaves, that that neighborhood, that city or that part of that city has 10% infected. So then, if the people were there for a while and you've got a certain transmission rate, then you expect 3% of the crew to be. So I didn't assume that there was some isolation between the soldiers and the civilian population or anything. They were mixing.
John Barry spoke correctly. Most of the embarkations, as you showed, went through New York,
Right.
but a much higher proportion of the infected embarkations went out of Boston.
Ah.
I don't think we should debate the model, because I don't
Yeah, yeah.
put much faith in the model as a model of the.
No, it's never. I should explain that.
Pointing out something worth looking
I should explain that this was not funded for scientific purposes. It was funded to actually produce material for high school students to learn about these things and to play with them and to explore them. And the thing that also meant, by the way, was that you not only build a model like this, but there's there's links to the student guide, teacher's guide, how to use this in a classroom and what you should be thinking about when you're playing with it and stuff. So it isn't just the model, if you're going to use it in school.
Interested in AI stuff, right?
Mm.
I think it would not be terribly difficult, would be useful, informative, constructive, to have policy cases reported. What happens with the information.
Right.
One of the reasons it's called the Spanish flu is that nobody else was reporting.
Right. Spain was neutral. They didn't have anything to hide. Everybody else didn't want the enemy to know that they were getting sick and so yes.
There are also deep empirical, puzzles, quandaries type things. I don't know how there's a lot of writing about it, but the famous case that actually always talks about is the Kansas City versus St. Louis. I can't remember how. I think of it was the chief of the public health officer in St. Louis. It was his lieutenant who was actually the one in Kansas City. They used very similar policies all the way to the very end, but then one shut the schools and one didn't.
Right.
And there's completely orthogonal results in those two cities.
Yeah, same thing with Manchester versus London, maybe. I don't know. Manchester did have a public health official that took it much more seriously than other cities in the UK, and there was different dynamics and stuff. Right? And I thought it was very interesting to read about. American Samoa was the only place in the world that avoided it completely, and the governor not only made this strong quarantine, he actually talked to all the local chiefs saying, this is really important. If you screw it up, we're all going to die. And, and nobody violated the quarantine. All these little islands in America, Samoa, just stayed put and never let anybody come in and out, and they never got it. Oh well, so almost finished here.
Is that model available?
Yeah. By the way, so why don't I, here, I think we're at almost, here, I could do it on this page. So, sorry. If you just go to, sorry, I'll do this more sensible way. Why am I, I think I just clobbered my slides, didn't I? Yeah. Sorry. Everything it could be found from here we go. This is what I want to do. Modelling4All.org. With the British spelling. And so if you go there, you get the kind of the introduction and some of the video of how it works and stuff. But if you go to the Behaviour Composer itself, then here's all the tutorials, and then here in the library it says sample models, and somewhere in here should be the Spanish flu model and so on. So there's all of these in here. So they all compiled in NetLogo models. They're kind of a higher level than NetLogo, but they all become NetLogo models, right? So I'm almost done. Oh yeah, so all of this effort to try to be make this agent-based modeling more accessible, does it really pay off? You can't really know, but like the Epidemic Game Maker, there really were these really interesting conversations. A lot of games got made. The MBA students, and we also did a whole thing with Predator Prey with biology students, and because for the first few years, the way the funding, we did all these surveys, we sure came out with 85% said they really enjoyed it and they got something. And we asked them some questions and they seemed to understand things they didn't know before. And the other thing that's very nice about this is that it's led to a few projects. There was a student that was, at the time, was doing his master's thesis on trying to understand medieval graveyards or something. And he took a little sampler course that I had about this using the Behaviour Composer, and he had never done any programming, but he kind of felt comfortable with the way the Behaviour Composer worked, and he built this demographic model that kept getting more and more sophisticated, and it led to his doctoral research. And then he's German, and he got it into some museums in Germany. The model's there and some running. And there was a oncology researcher that asked if it would be possible to use this to model cancer cells and network inside each one, and then they would be two levels, and the gene network would influence whether the cell would reproduce or die or send out certain chemicals that would influence its neighbors and so on. And that project was started as just a proof of concept, but now it's well funded, and there's postdocs, and they've got funding for both using the model to guide real wetware experiments. So they would kind of run a bunch of simulations, and then it's still in NetLogo. They're kind of considering whether with the big project to move off it or something. But I should explain they wanted oncology researchers to play with their model, so they built a custom web page. But the problem is you wanted to be able to run 100 runs of it or something. So the web page would actually use the one of these clusters and really run it on 96 different nodes, and then send back to a web page that had all the data with nice graphs and all this, so that researchers could set up experiments. But yeah, I don't think so. I remember they only had 50 or 60 different genes they thought were the most important ones for what they were trying to model or something. And then the last example, excuse me, there's an anthropology professor who had written actually 3 books about his theory about different kinds of modes of religiosity and how they could spread in splinter groups. And the vision, even though he ended up being too busy and it was a little disappointing, was that I would build micro-behaviors that were at the level of his theory, that the leader of the religion is once a week preaching, and so the idea was to sort of ground it in cognitive science, so that the agents had little semantic networks, and they would get bored and get excited and so on, and so the model was quite successful, led to another doctoral thesis and some nice publications that are well cited and all this. But my hope was that I would build the building blocks, and then the real domain expert would be playing with them, putting them together, experimenting with things. But he kept telling me what to do instead of putting them together.
These guys from Norway?
Right. So this is an Oxford Harvey Whitehouse, but his graduate student then went and to to both, first to the group in Boston and then the one in Norway that are also modeling religion. So there's 3 or 4 groups doing it, but they're all kind of sharing some of the same people and ideas and so on. All right. So the last thing I wanted to say maybe is where this could go next. I really think this journal called Distill.pub is a great vision of how journals should work. It's in the machine learning community right now, but all of the figures are very interactive. They really illustrate in a kind of a deep way the different ideas they're trying to get across, because you're really running models or running ways of seeing what kinds of stimuli optimally stimulate certain layers of the network, or all these kinds of things. And then they often will have in the paper a link to a Jupyter notebook where you can play with the full code and play with it yourself. And they even use GitHub for versioning of the papers and of the whole review process, where reviewers actually raise issues and people could respond. I don't know. It's a very nice journal, but I think that idea would work well for agent-based modeling as well, because the models themselves are interactive in the same way that some deep learning model could be interactive. And we experimented and got working in Second Life a NetLogo model that was running in NetLogo, but it was spitting out and size, those sorts of numbers, to a file that was being read by some code in Second Life, so that you could see the fish, it was a swarming model, and you could see the fish moving around, but many people could go in there and you could even get in the way of the fish and they would kind of go around you or something like this. But we only kind of did proof of concept, and then again, when we changed servers, it was just too hard to get that working, and we stopped it or something. And then the last thing is, I thought this was a really cool thing. These 2 researchers in Sweden, they were doing like an ecosystem model where different animals were moving around, eating different things, reproducing, and so on. Or no, they're capable of doing any of these things. But what worked was there's a giant map that was maybe about as big as this table or something. And there was RFID tag readers built in somehow. And the kids that visited the museum, there was something. And then on the big screen, the model was constantly running. But as the kid would add eating grass they would drop it on top of a picture of the sheep. Now the sheep would start eating grass because it now has that behavior or something. So it was, very direct, and then the behaviors were very tangible behaviors that you could just, a piece of plastic with a picture on it, just drop it on another picture, and now that agent now has this new behavior. And so that was I think a very clear way to make things accessible, and a lot of it was mostly successful, I think, not as sort of the normal exhibit, but as school field trips, museum happens all the time, and 30 kids or 50 kids come at once, and they would all be on the mat controlling the model and watching it happen, and then another 50 kids come through. So that's another way to make things accessible. All right, so that was what I wanted to talk about. There's the URL for all of these slides, and I just wanted to make a little plug for what I've been doing for a bit more than a year now, which is a very different project about helping kids make AI programs, doing machine learning and speech and vision recognition and stuff. So if anybody around here is also interested in that topic, I'm around for a while. But thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer more questions.